The cargo transport Meridian Drift moved through the outer lanes like a patient animal that had long ago accepted the slow rhythm of space. Inside its metal corridors, the air carried the faint scent of heated circuits and recycled oxygen, a smell Alex Ward had come to associate with both boredom and safety. For a technician, the ship was an endless loop of small problems. A flickering panel here, a whining stabilizer there, the occasional argument with the ship's navigation AI, which seemed to have developed a personality somewhere between a tired librarian and a sarcastic comedian. Alex, the AI said over the maintenance channel, the environmental sensor in cargo section 3 reports an anomaly. That's a fancy way of saying it's broken again, Alex muttered, tightening a loose connector on a wall panel. I fixed that yesterday. Then I congratulate you on your consistency. The anomaly is consistent as well. Alex sighed and grabbed his toolkit. One day I'm going to reprogram you to say encouraging things. I already do. For example, I am encouraging you to go to cargo section 3. He snorted and headed down the corridor, boots echoing faintly on the metal floor. The lighting in the cargo bays was dimmer than in the living quarters, designed to conserve energy and avoid overheating certain shipments. Long rows of sealed containers stretched into shadow, each labeled with codes that meant little to anyone except customs officials and freight brokers. The environmental panel was easy enough to find, glowing faintly red against the wall. Alex knelt and opened it, already anticipating another loose relay or faulty circuit. He was halfway through checking the wiring when he heard it, a small, uneven sound, like someone trying very hard not to cry. He froze, listening. The ship's engines hummed steadily. A deep vibration felt more than heard. Pipes ticked softly as temperature differentials equalized. But beneath those familiar noises, there it was again, a faint sniffle. Alex slowly stood, turning toward the rows of containers. Hello, he called quietly. If you're a stowaway, you picked a very dull ship. No answer. He took a few cautious steps between the crates, his hand resting instinctively on the flashlight clipped to his belt. The beam cut through the dimness, sliding across metal surfaces and stacked cargo nets. And then he saw her. A small figure crouched in the narrow space between two containers, hugging her knees, eyes wide and shining in the light. She looked like a human child at first glance, small, thin, with tangled hair falling around her face. But as Alex's eyes adjusted, he noticed the difference. Her ears were long, slender, tapering elegantly to soft points that trembled slightly as she watched him. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Well, Alex said at last, his voice gentle, you're definitely not in the passenger manifest. The girl blinked, clearly not understanding his words, but the tone seemed to calm her a little. She didn't run, which Alex took as a good sign. Slowly, he crouched down, setting his toolkit aside and keeping his hands visible. It's okay, he said. I'm not going to hurt you. She studied him, breathing unevenly, as if trying to decide whether he was telling the truth. Her clothes were unfamiliar, simple but made of a material that shimmered faintly in the flashlight beam, like woven threads of light. Around her neck hung a small metallic pendant, shaped like an intricate spiral. Alex felt a strange, quiet realization settle over him. Whoever she was, wherever she had come from, she was very far from home. He reached into one of the pockets of his jacket and pulled out a ration bar, holding it up and taking an exaggerated bite. He chewed thoughtfully, nodding as if evaluating a fine meal. Gourmet cuisine, he said. 5 stars. Highly recommended. The girl watched, her expression uncertain. After a moment, he held the bar out to her. She hesitated, then slowly reached forward and took it. Her fingers were small and cool, trembling slightly. She sniffed the ration bar suspiciously, then took a cautious bite. Her eyes widened. Alex smiled. See? Not terrible. That's the highest compliment anyone ever gives those things. She ate quickly after that, as if she hadn't had a proper meal in some time. Alex pretended to inspect a nearby crate, giving her the illusion of privacy, though he kept a careful watch out of the corner of his eye. When she finished, she looked up at him again, some of the fear gone now, replaced by curiosity. That's better, Alex said softly. Now we just need to figure out how you got here. He activated his wrist console, pulling up the cargo logs. There were hundreds of entries, shipments loaded and unloaded across multiple stations. Nothing that explained a small alien child appearing in the bay. "You didn't sneak aboard in a box labeled fragile, did you?" he asked lightly. The girl tilted her head, clearly puzzled, but the gentle tone made her relax further. After a moment, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, no larger than a coin. With a soft click, it projected a tiny holographic image into the air. It was a creature, round and fluffy, with 3 legs and enormous eyes. It hopped in a circle, chirping faintly. Alex stared at it, then burst out laughing before he could stop himself. That's either the cutest animal I've ever seen or the galaxy's most inefficient predator." The girl giggled, a soft, musical sound that seemed to echo in the quiet cargo bay. For the first time since he had found her, Alex felt the tension ease. Whatever strange situation he had stumbled into, at least the child was no longer crying. He leaned back against a crate, watching the tiny holographic creature hop in endless circles. "Well," he said, "I suppose every ship needs a mascot." The girl looked at him, her large eyes bright now, and for a moment the vast emptiness of space beyond the hull felt a little less cold. The cargo bay felt different the next morning, as if the presence of one small, long-eared child had shifted the atmosphere of an entire starship. Alex noticed it immediately when he stepped through the hatch, carrying a small thermal container and 2 dented cups. The girl was sitting cross-legged on a folded cargo blanket he had found for her the night before, carefully arranging small metallic fasteners into neat rows as if they were precious artifacts instead of spare bolts. "Good morning," Alex said, setting the container down. "I bring breakfast, or at least something legally allowed to be called breakfast." She looked up, watching him with cautious curiosity, but the fear that had filled her eyes the previous night had softened. He poured a little heated nutrient broth into one of the cups and blew across the surface, then tasted it with an exaggerated expression of deep concentration. "Still not poison," he announced. "A promising start to the day." The girl smiled faintly and accepted the cup. She drank slowly, holding it in both hands as if savoring the warmth more than the taste. Alex leaned back against a crate, studying her in the quiet hum of the ship. Up close, her features were delicate and expressive, and the long ears that set her apart from any human seemed almost fragile, catching the dim light along their narrow edges. He wondered what world she came from, what sky she had last seen before ending up hidden among freight containers. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "most stowaways at least try to sneak into the passenger decks. Better lighting, softer beds. You picked the worst possible hiding place." She tilted her head, clearly not understanding the words but amused by his tone. After a moment, she pointed to herself and spoke a soft, unfamiliar word. Alex blinked. "Is that your name?" She repeated it, tapping her chest gently. The sound was fluid, almost musical, difficult for his ears to reproduce. "I'm going to need practice," Alex admitted. He pointed to himself. "Alex." She tried to mimic it. "A lek." "Close enough," he said, smiling. "I answer to worse." The ship gave a faint shudder as it adjusted course, the engines shifting to a deeper, steadier vibration. Somewhere overhead, cargo clamps locked into new positions with a distant metallic thud. Routine operations, but Alex found himself more aware of every sound now, as if responsible for more than just machinery. He activated his wrist console, pulling up external scans and traffic reports. There was nothing unusual in the immediate sector, only the slow drift of freighters and the occasional patrol vessel. No alerts, no searches, nothing that explained a missing child. "You're a mystery," he murmured. The girl had finished her broth and was now watching the console display with fascination. Streams of symbols and navigation lines flickered across the small screen, reflecting in her wide eyes. She reached out cautiously, touching one of the glowing indicators. "That's a star map," Alex said, or more accurately, a very boring representation of one. She studied it intently, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the small projector again. With a quiet click, the holographic creature appeared, hopping in midair. But this time she adjusted something on the device, and the projection changed. A cluster of stars appeared instead, tiny points of light arranged in a pattern Alex didn't recognize. She pointed at it, then at herself. "That's where you're from?" he asked gently. She nodded. Alex leaned closer, committing the pattern to memory. "Well, that narrows it down to only a few million possibilities." She didn't understand the words, but his expression made her laugh softly. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, broken only by the faint sounds of the ship and the occasional chirp of the holographic creature, which now seemed to have developed the habit of hopping onto Alex's shoulder before falling straight through it and repeating the process with tireless enthusiasm. "You're persistent," Alex told the projection. "I respect that." Hours passed more quickly than he expected. Normally, a maintenance shift dragged endlessly, every minute stretching like cooling metal. But now time seemed to fold in on itself, filled with small discoveries and quiet moments. At one point, the girl followed him as he inspected a faulty grav stabilizer panel. She watched intently as he removed the casing and adjusted a delicate coil. "See this?" he said, pointing to the component. "This little piece keeps the cargo from drifting around like balloons at a festival. Without it, everything floats, which sounds fun until a 2-ton crate bumps into your head." She listened as if he were explaining the secrets of the universe. When he finished, he tapped the panel, and the stabilizer hummed back to life. The girl clapped softly, clearly impressed. "Thank you," Alex said, giving a small bow. "I'll be here all week." Later, as the ship entered a long, quiet stretch between jump corridors, the lights dimmed automatically to simulate evening. Alex found another blanket and showed her how to roll it into a pillow. She watched carefully, then adjusted it with precise, deliberate movements, as if determined to master the technique. Before settling down, she activated the projector one more time. The 3-legged creature appeared again, hopping in its endless circle. Alex lay back against a crate, folding his arms behind his head. "You know," he said, watching the tiny projection, "if that thing ever becomes real, I hope it doesn't learn to run." 3 legs seemed like an unfair advantage. The girl giggled, covering her mouth with one hand. For a moment, the cargo bay felt almost peaceful, a small pocket of warmth drifting through the vast cold of space. And as Alex listened to the steady breathing of the child beside him and the distant, comforting thrum of the engines, he realized something that surprised him. He was no longer thinking about how she had arrived. He was thinking about how to keep her safe. By the 3rd day, the cargo bay no longer felt like a hiding place. It had begun to feel, in a quiet and improvised way, like a small and fragile home drifting between stars. Alex noticed the change when he caught himself bringing 2 cups of heated grain instead of one, without even thinking about it. The girl was awake, sitting near the open maintenance panel where he had been working earlier, carefully examining a handful of spare connectors as if they were puzzle pieces from some unknown machine. "You're going to become an engineer at this rate," Alex said, setting the cups down. "I should start charging tuition." She looked up and smiled, the expression coming more easily now. The fear that had once made her movements hesitant had faded, replaced by a quiet curiosity that reminded Alex of himself as a child, taking apart household appliances to see how they worked, usually without much success when it came to putting them back together. The engine shifted pitch slightly as the Meridian Drift prepared for a short-range jump. A low vibration ran through the deck, a sound Alex had heard so many times that it had become as familiar as breathing. The girl felt it too. She looked up, her long ears twitching faintly as the hull resonated. "Just the drive warming up," Alex said reassuringly. "Perfectly safe, statistically speaking." She raised an eyebrow, clearly not understanding the words but somehow sensing the dry humor in his tone. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Moments later, the stars outside the small observation slit near the cargo hatch, stretched into thin, luminous lines, and the ship slipped into jump. Even after years in space, Alex never entirely got used to that moment. The strange sensation of movement without motion, as if reality itself had taken a quiet breath and paused. The girl stared at the shifting light with open fascination, her eyes reflecting the pale glow. "It's like folding a map," Alex said softly. "Except the map is space, and we're the pencil mark." She leaned closer to the slit, pressing her hand against the cool metal frame. For a long time, neither of them spoke. When the ship emerged back into normal space, the transition was gentle, almost imperceptible. The engines settled into their steady hum again, and the familiar darkness returned, scattered with distant stars. Alex checked his console out of habit. Traffic reports, navigation data, system diagnostics, all normal. But something else caught his attention. A brief transmission in the public channel, faint and distorted by distance. He replayed it, increasing the clarity. Search continues. Last confirmed sighting unknown. Escort vessels, expanding perimeter. The message cut off in static. Alex frowned. He didn't know what the transmission referred to, but a quiet unease settled in his thoughts. He glanced at the girl, who was now sitting cross-legged again, projecting her small holographic creatures and watching them hop across the floor. He decided not to mention the transmission. Not yet. Instead, he reached for a small toolkit and began repairing a cracked sensor casing nearby. The familiar rhythm of work steadied him, each movement precise and deliberate. The girl watched for a while, then crawled closer, studying the tools with interest. "This," Alex said, holding up a microspanner, "is the most important instrument in the galaxy. With this, you can fix almost anything, except a broken coffee dispenser. Those are beyond salvation." She tilted her head, then picked up a small screwdriver and examined it carefully, turning it in her fingers as if memorizing its shape. "Just don't start disassembling the ship," Alex added. "I like the ship assembled." She made a soft sound that might have been laughter. Later, while Alex was organizing supplies, the girl approached him and tugged lightly at his sleeve. She pointed toward the open cargo hatch that led to a narrow observation corridor rarely used by the crew. "You want to see outside?" Alex guessed. She nodded. The corridor was quiet, lit by a long strip of soft white light. At the end, a reinforced viewport looked out over the endless expanse of space. Stars shimmered in dense clusters, and far in the distance, a faint blue nebula glowed like a veil of light. The girl stepped closer to the glass, her reflection faint against the vastness beyond. For a moment, she simply stood there, silent and still. Alex leaned against the wall, watching her rather than the view. There was something in her expression, something that looked like longing. "You miss home," he said quietly, though he knew she couldn't understand the words. She placed her hand against the viewport, as if reaching towards something impossibly far away. After a while, she activated her projector again. But this time, instead of animals or stars, it displayed a small scene. A group of figures standing in a wide, luminous hall, their forms blurred but their long ears unmistakable. At the center stood a taller figure, elegant and composed, wearing what looked like a crown formed from arcs of light. The girl pointed at the central figure, then at herself. Alex felt a slow realization begin to form, though he wasn't ready to follow it to its conclusion. Whoever the child was, she was not ordinary, not even by the broad standards of the galaxy. "Well," he said lightly, forcing a small smile, "I suppose that makes you important." She looked at him, and for a moment her expression was serious, almost solemn. Then the projection flickered, and the three-legged creature appeared again, hopping energetically across the corridor floor as if determined to restore the balance of the universe through sheer absurdity. Alex laughed, the tension easing. "Yes, much better. Important people should always travel with ridiculous animals." The girl giggled, and the sound echoed softly in the quiet corridor. They stayed there for a long time, watching the stars, the nebula slowly drifting across the darkness like a silent tide. And as Alex stood beside the small, long-eared child, who had somehow become part of his quiet routine, he realized that the universe felt larger than it had before. Not emptier, but deeper, filled with stories he had never imagined. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of his understanding, he knew that someone was still searching for her. The fourth day began with a strange stillness, the kind that settled over a ship when most of the crew were asleep, and the engines carried on their endless, patient work without interruption. Alex was already awake, sitting on an overturned crate with a datapad balanced on his knee, trying to decipher fragments of long-range traffic reports that had come in overnight. None of it was clear enough to be certain, but there was a pattern. Scattered mentions of patrol formations, expanded search grids, and restricted corridors near several trade routes. Nothing official, nothing confirmed. yet enough to leave a quiet unease lingering in the back of his mind. He glanced over at the girl who was still asleep, curled under the blanket, with one hand resting near the small projector device. Even in sleep, her long ears twitched faintly now and then, as if responding to sounds too subtle for human hearing. Alex exhaled slowly and closed the datapad. Whatever was happening out there, it could wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the small, unexpected responsibility that had found its way into his cargo bay. A few minutes later, she stirred and opened her eyes, blinking at the dim light. When she saw him sitting nearby, she gave a small smile that made the tension in his chest ease more than he wanted to admit. "Morning," he said softly. "Breakfast is slightly less terrible than yesterday. I consider that progress." She sat up, stretching, and followed him to the small heating unit where he prepared 2 cups of grain mash. As usual, he tasted it first, making an exaggerated show of considering the flavor. He said gravely. "Still tastes like warm cardboard, but at least it's consistent." She laughed softly, and the sound seemed to brighten the quiet cargo bay. After they ate, Alex decided to show her a part of the ship she hadn't seen yet, the maintenance ring that circled the outer hull. It wasn't exactly comfortable or scenic, but it had long observation panels and a view that made even routine inspections feel worthwhile. They walked slowly through the narrow corridor, the hum of systems vibrating faintly through the walls. The girl stayed close beside him, her eyes wide as she took in every detail. The flickering diagnostic lights, the faint glow of plasma conduits behind transparent shielding, the distant shimmer of stars through the reinforced windows. At one point, they passed a service drone docked in its charging cradle. The machine activated briefly as they approached, its sensors lighting up with a soft blue glow. "Unit 47, Alex said, tapping the casing. "Don't worry, it only bites on alternate Tuesdays." The drone emitted a polite chime, which Alex chose to interpret as mild offense. The girl covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. They reached one of the larger observation panels, and Alex leaned against the wall, looking out at the endless darkness scattered with distant points of light. Somewhere out there were civilizations, worlds, entire histories unfolding beyond his knowledge. And somewhere, almost certainly, someone was searching for the child standing beside him. He didn't say that aloud. Instead, he pointed toward a faint cluster of lights drifting far off the port side. "See that? That's a mining convoy, probably arguing about fuel prices and whose turn it is to fix the life support filters." She studied the distant ships, then looked at him with an expression that clearly asked a question he couldn't hear. "Yes," he said, guessing. "Space is mostly boring. That's the secret nobody tells you." She tilted her head, unconvinced. He chuckled. "All right. Sometimes it's beautiful, too." For a while they stood in silence, watching the stars. Then the ship's comm system crackled faintly, and a distant announcement echoed through the corridor. Routine navigation updates, nothing unusual. Yet Alex noticed the girl stiffen slightly, her ears angling toward the sound. "You hear things earlier than I do, don't you?" he said quietly. She nodded. "That must be useful," he said. "You could hear someone opening the last packet of biscuits from 3 rooms away." She didn't understand the words, but his tone made her smile again. Later, as they returned to the cargo bay, Alex found himself thinking about the projection she had shown him the previous day. The figures in the luminous hall, the tall woman wearing what looked like a crown of light. The memory lingered, like a puzzle piece he couldn't quite place. He was about to dismiss the thought when the ship's navigation AI spoke over the intercom. "Alex Ward." "Yes," he replied. "Updated traffic advisory. Increased patrol activity near the capital station. Estimated arrival in 36 hours. Alex felt a small, tight knot form in his chest. "Any reason given?" "Officially, routine security measures. Unofficially, the public channels are filled with speculation." "About what?" A brief pause. "A missing individual of significant importance." Alex swallowed, glancing at the girl, who was sitting on the blanket and carefully arranging her small collection of bolts into a spiral pattern. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome," the AI replied. "Would you like me to speculate further? I have several dramatic theories prepared." "Please don't." "As you wish, though I believe one involves space pirates disguised as musicians." Alex couldn't help smiling faintly. "I'll keep that in mind." The rest of the day passed in a strange mixture of calm and quiet anticipation. Alex completed routine checks, repaired a faulty coolant valve, and even attempted to teach the girl how to play a simple hand-clapping game he remembered from childhood. She mastered the rhythm almost immediately, which he considered mildly unfair. "You're supposed to struggle a little," he protested. "It builds character." She laughed and repeated the pattern even faster, clearly enjoying his mock frustration. As the ship's lights dimmed to simulate evening, Alex sat back against a crate, watching the faint glow of the projector as the three-legged creature hopped in its endless loop. The engines thrummed steadily, carrying them closer to the capital station with every passing hour. And though the cargo bay felt peaceful, Alex couldn't shake the quiet certainty growing in his mind, that the calm would not last much longer, and that whatever waited for them at the end of this journey would change everything. The capital station appeared on the forward screens like a rising city made of light, its vast rings and towers turning slowly against the black of space. Even from a distance it dominated the horizon, a structure so immense that Alex always felt a quiet sense of disbelief when approaching it, as if something that large should have required gravity just to exist. The girl stood beside him in the observation corridor, staring at the station with silent fascination. Reflections of the rotating rings shimmered in her eyes, and for a moment she seemed very small, as if the scale of the universe had suddenly become visible to her. "Well," Alex said softly, folding his arms, "there it is, the busiest place in 3 sectors. Try not to be impressed. It'll only encourage them." She looked up at him, puzzled by his tone, but comforted by his calmness. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All crew, prepare for docking procedures. Cargo inspections will begin immediately upon arrival." Alex felt a faint tightening in his chest. "Cargo inspections?" He glanced at the girl. She was watching the station, unaware of what those words might mean. He forced himself to breathe slowly. There was no reason to panic yet. Inspections were routine. They checked containers, manifests, occasionally crew quarters. Rarely the maintenance bays, and almost never every corner of a cargo hold. Rarely wasn't never, though. Back in the cargo bay, Alex began tidying the space with quiet efficiency, stacking crates, sealing panels, and running diagnostic checks he didn't strictly need to run. The girl followed him, sensing the change in his mood. "It's just procedure," he said, half to her and half to himself. "People in uniforms asking questions they already know the answers to. Very exciting." She studied his face, as if trying to decide whether he was joking. A low vibration passed through the hull as the meridian drift aligned with the docking clamps. A few seconds later came the heavy, resonant sound of metal locking against metal, followed by the faint hiss of pressure equalizing. They had arrived. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then footsteps echoed faintly from the far end of the cargo deck. Multiple footsteps, measured and precise. Alex felt his pulse quicken. The hatch slid open with a quiet, mechanical sigh, and a group of security officers entered, their armor polished and their movements disciplined. Behind them floated a small scanning drone, its sensors sweeping the bay with a soft blue glow. The girl moved closer to Alex, her hand gripping the sleeve of his jacket. "It's okay," he murmured under his breath, though he wasn't entirely sure it was. One of the officers stepped forward. "Technician Alex Ward?" "That's me," Alex said, raising a hand. "I'd shake yours, but I suspect your gloves are worth more than my ship." The officer regarded him for a moment, expression unreadable. "We are conducting a search." "I gathered that," Alex replied lightly. "Let me know if you find anything interesting. I've been looking for a missing screwdriver for 3 days." A few of the officers exchanged brief glances, and Alex thought he detected the faintest hint of suppressed amusement behind one visor. The scanning drone drifted closer, its soft hum filling the air. The girl's grip on his sleeve tightened. Then from the corridor beyond the cargo bay, another group entered. Taller figures, their armor different, more ceremonial than tactical. At their center walked a woman. Alex knew, even before she spoke, that she was the one in the projection. She moved with quiet authority, her posture effortless, her presence filling the space without a word. Her long ears curved gracefully, and her dark hair fell over shoulders, draped in garments that shimmered faintly like liquid metal. Around her head rested a circlet formed of interwoven arcs, delicate yet unmistakably regal. The girl inhaled sharply. "Amara," the woman said, her voice steady, but carrying a depth of emotion that made the single word feel like an entire sentence. The child broke from Alex's side and ran to her. The queen dropped to one knee, gathering her daughter into her arms, holding her with a fierce, almost desperate relief that no ceremony could hide. For a moment, the entire cargo bay seemed to hold its breath. Alex looked away, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a private moment. When the queen finally rose, still holding the child close, her gaze turned to him. Her eyes were sharp, searching, measuring. "You are the one who found her," she said. Alex shifted slightly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Technically, she found me. I was just fixing a panel." A faint murmur passed among the officers, as if no one had ever answered the queen in quite that tone before. She stepped closer, studying him with quiet intensity. "You sheltered her?" "Yes." "You fed her, protected her?" Alex shrugged lightly. "She looked hungry." The queen's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened, just slightly. "And what do you ask in return?" she said. Alex blinked. "Ask? For your actions," she clarified. "Compensation? Reward? Favor?" He hesitated, genuinely surprised by the question. Then he glanced at the girl who was now clinging to her mother's hand but looking back at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Nothing," Alex said simply. "I just wanted to make sure she was all right." The silence that followed felt different, not tense, but profound, as if something invisible had shifted in the air. The queen studied him for a long moment, her gaze no longer measuring, but searching, as if trying to understand a language she had never encountered before. At last, she inclined her head slightly. "You have my gratitude, Alex Ward." He smiled faintly. "You're welcome." Behind them, the scanning drone emitted a soft, cheerful chime, as if pleased that its search had ended successfully. Alex glanced at it and muttered, "You could have at least helped me find my screwdriver." To his surprise, the queen's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. The cargo bay did not return to normal after the reunion. The security officers remained, though their posture had changed. Weapons were lowered, voices quieter, movements less rigid. The scanning drone drifted lazily near the ceiling, as if uncertain what to do now that its purpose had been fulfilled. Alex stood where he was, suddenly very aware that he was still holding a thermal cup in one hand. It now felt like the most unnecessary object in the galaxy. The queen knelt again to speak softly to her daughter, their voices low and musical, carrying a cadence Alex could not understand but could somehow feel. The child, Amara, he now knew, answered quickly, gesturing toward him more than once, her small hands moving with animated urgency. Alex shifted his weight awkwardly. Being discussed in a language you didn't understand was a strange experience. It felt a bit like standing in a room where everyone else could hear a radio you couldn't. At last the queen rose and turned back to him. "She says," the queen said, her voice measured but gentler than before, "that you shared your food with her, showed her the stars, and made her laugh when she was afraid." Alex rubbed the back of his neck again. "Well, the stars were already there. I can't really take credit for those." A faint flicker of amusement passed across her face, gone almost before he was certain it had been there. "You did more than you think," she said quietly. One of the officers stepped forward, murmuring something to the queen. She listened, then shook her head slightly, dismissing whatever suggestion had been made. The officer inclined his head and stepped back without argument. Alex noticed that. Whoever she was, and he knew well enough by now, her authority wasn't the loud kind. It was the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. "I had expected," the queen said, looking at him again, "that whoever found my daughter would demand something in return. Wealth, influence, access to our territories. It is the way of most people." Alex considered that for a moment. "I already have access to the most important thing in the universe." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "And what is that?" He gestured vaguely around the cargo bay. "Free oxygen." For a second, one of the officers made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The queen blinked, then allowed herself a small, genuine smile. I see, she said. A philosopher. Only on days when the machinery isn't exploding, Alex replied. Amara tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing toward the projector lying on the blanket. The Queen followed her gaze and Alex picked up the small device and activated it. The three-legged holographic creature appeared, hopping energetically in midair. The Queen regarded it in silence for a moment. This, Alex said solemnly, is clearly the most dangerous life form in known space. Amara giggled, and after a second, the Queen's smile returned, warmer this time. It seems, she said, that my daughter has found a good teacher. I mostly taught her that ration bars are edible, Alex said. I'm not sure that qualifies as education. They began walking slowly toward the exit corridor, the officers keeping a respectful distance. Alex followed, unsure whether he was supposed to accompany them or remain behind, but no one told him to stop, so he kept walking. The docking corridor of the Capitol station stretched ahead, vast and bright compared to the dim cargo decks of the Meridian Drift. Through the transparent sections of the outer wall, Alex could see the immense interior of the station. Traffic lanes filled with ships, suspended walkways crowded with travelers, distant towers glowing with layered lights. Even after years of travel, the scale of it still impressed him. Amara pressed her hand against the glass as they walked, watching the endless movement outside. For the first time since the reunion, Alex noticed that she seemed completely at ease, her earlier tension gone now that she was beside her mother. You will come with us, the Queen said suddenly. Alex blinked. I will? Yes. There are formalities to observe, and I would speak with you further. He hesitated. Is this the part where I accidentally insult someone important and get thrown into space? The Queen glanced at him, puzzled for a second, then shook her head slightly. No. Good, Alex said. I try to schedule those incidents at least a week in advance. They continued through the corridors, passing through security fields that shimmered faintly as they crossed. Alex noticed that people stepped aside as the Queen approached, bowing their heads or lowering their eyes. The movement spread ahead of her like a silent tide. He leaned slightly toward her and said in a low voice, I think they know who you are. They should, she replied calmly. That must make ordering coffee complicated. She looked at him, clearly unfamiliar with the word. Coffee? A beverage, Alex said, highly valued by humans, mostly because it keeps us from falling asleep while operating heavy machinery. She considered this seriously. That seems wise. They entered a quieter corridor, the noise of the main concourse fading behind them. The lighting here was softer, the walls lined with intricate patterns that seemed to shift subtly as one walked past, like living designs responding to motion. Amara had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, her head resting against the Queen's shoulder, completely at peace. Alex watched them for a moment, struck by how ordinary the scene looked despite everything. The most powerful woman in an entire sector, carrying her sleeping child like any other parent. Alex Ward, the Queen said quietly without looking at him, there are many things in this galaxy that can be bought, traded, or taken. Kindness is not one of them. He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. They walked on in silence for a while, the distant hum of the station surrounding them like a living heartbeat. And for the first time since he had found the frightened child in the cargo bay, Alex began to understand that the journey he had stumbled into was far from over. The chamber where Alex found himself waiting was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if silence itself were part of its design. Tall windows curved along one wall, revealing the slow rotation of the Capitol station beyond. Layers of light drifting like distant constellations. The air carried a faint, unfamiliar scent, something floral but sharper, like rain on warm stone. He sat in a chair that seemed far too elegant for someone who spent most of his life fixing coolant valves. After a few minutes, he stood again, then sat, then stood once more. Well, he muttered to himself, at least the chairs don't squeak. That's something. The doors opened softly and Queen Jera'seth entered, Amara walking beside her, holding her hand. The girl smiled as soon as she saw Alex and hurried over, wrapping her arms around his waist with the complete certainty of a child who had already decided who her friends were. Alex laughed quietly. Hello to you, too. The Queen watched the moment in silence before speaking. She has spoken of you constantly. I hope she left out the part where I dropped a ration bar on the floor and tried to pretend it was still clean. Amara giggled, clearly understanding enough of his tone to know he was joking. They sat together near the window, and for a time they simply watched the ships moving in the distance. The quiet felt comfortable, not awkward, like the silence between people who had already said the important things. At last the Queen spoke. My daughter slipped away from her escort while we were passing through a transit corridor. She has always been curious. She followed a maintenance crew, and by the time we realized she was gone, she had already been carried far beyond our search perimeter. Alex nodded slowly. She's good at hiding. I didn't notice her at first either. The Queen's expression softened. For 3 days we searched. Patrols, scans, inquiries across half the sector. Every hour without news. She paused as if searching for the right words, then simply said, I began to fear the worst. Amara reached up and squeezed her hand, and the Queen smiled faintly. You gave us back what we thought was lost, she said, looking at Alex. That is not a small thing. Alex shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. I just did what anyone would do. The Queen regarded him for a moment. No, you did what few would do. A soft chime sounded and a small service unit rolled in, carrying 3 cups of a steaming dark liquid. The Queen lifted one and handed it to Alex. This is the beverage you spoke of, she said. Coffee. Our attendants researched it. Alex stared at the cup, then took a cautious sip. His eyes widened. That, he said solemnly, is excellent. You may have just improved diplomatic relations between our species. Amara wrinkled her nose at the smell, and Alex leaned closer to her and whispered, Trust me, you're not missing anything until you're at least 40. The girl laughed, and even the Queen allowed herself a quiet smile. They spoke for a long time after that, not of politics or treaties, but of small things. Alex told them about the Meridian Drift, about the endless maintenance routines and the navigation AI that believed itself to be a comedian. Amara listened with fascination, occasionally interrupting with questions in her own language, which her mother translated. In return, the Queen spoke of her world, of vast plains under silver skies and cities grown from living crystal, of the responsibilities of leadership and the loneliness that sometimes came with it. Alex listened, realizing that behind the title and the authority was someone who carried more weight than anyone should have to carry alone. At last, as the lights of the station shifted toward evening cycle, the Queen rose. You are free to return to your ship, she said. But know this, Alex Ward, you will always be welcome here. He stood as well, unsure what to say. Thank you. Though I should warn you, if I visit too often, I may start fixing things. That, she replied, would not be unwelcome. Amara ran to him one last time, pressing the small projector into his hand. He looked at it in surprise. I can't take this, he said gently. She nodded firmly, pushing it back toward him. The Queen inclined her head. She wishes you to have it, a reminder. Alex looked down at the device, then back at them. Then I'll keep it safe. They walked together to the docking corridor. The Meridian Drift waited where he had left it, looking as ordinary as ever, a humble transport ship among hundreds of larger vessels. Before he boarded, Alex turned back. The Queen and her daughter stood in the soft light, watching him. For a moment, he felt the strange pull of 2 different lives, the quiet solitude of his work and the unexpected connection he had found here. He raised a hand in farewell. Amara waved back enthusiastically, and the Queen inclined her head once more. Inside the ship, the familiar hum of the engines greeted him like an old friend. As he moved through the corridors, everything felt the same, and yet not the same at all. He paused in the cargo bay, standing in the spot where he had first heard a faint, frightened sob. The memory felt distant now, like the beginning of a journey that had carried him farther than any star chart. He activated the small projector. The 3-legged creature appeared, hopping in its endless circle. Alex smiled. Well, he said quietly, I suppose every ship still needs a mascot. The engines thrummed, the docking clamps released, and the Meridian Drift eased back into the vast, silent ocean of stars. And as the station's lights grew smaller behind him, Alex realized that the universe no longer felt quite so empty as it once had.